"Mom won't leave you anything, Rebecca. All the assets will go to Charles and his children." Her words hit me like a slap to the face. My whole life, I believed I was the only one deserving of inheriting everything my father left behind. But now, her words seemed to shatter everything I had once believed. I stood there, feeling like the ground beneath me was disappearing, but strangely, I didn't feel pain or anger. I looked at my mother, my eyes void of any emotion. I had spent my whole life learning patience, and now was the time to put everything I had prepared into action. I didn't rush to react. Instead, I gave a slight smile. "I understand, Mom. Just know that what you've done won't stop here." She looked at me in confusion, but I had already planned my next moves. And now, our game was just beginning. The day I discovered the truth was the day everything changed. I had always believed that my father's legacy would be mine, that I, his only daughter, would inherit everything he had worked so hard for. I never imagined that the one person I trusted most in the world, my mother, would betray me in the most heartless way possible. But that was before I walked into the living room and found her sitting there, her new husband beside her, as they spoke of dividing up what was rightfully mine. It was a cold day in Atlanta when everything began to unravel. I had spent the last few months in a haze, still mourning my father's death, trying to find my place in a world without him. His passing had been sudden, a shock that left me reeling. And just when I thought things couldn't get worse, my mother decided to remarry. At first, I tried to be understanding. I knew she had been lonely. She had always spoken of her love for my father, and I couldn't imagine how difficult it must have been for her. But Charles, my new stepfather, was something else. He wasn't like my father, nor could he ever replace him. He was calculating, charming in an unsettling way, and there was something about him that made me uneasy. But I kept quiet. For my mother's sake, I told myself. After all, she was still grieving, wasn't she? She needed someone to fill the void, someone to lean on. I told myself it was normal, that she would come to her senses in time. That was until that fateful morning. I had just returned from a meeting, tired and distracted, when I walked into the house and heard their voices. I thought I'd find my mother alone, but instead, she was sitting beside Charles, both of them looking far too comfortable for my liking. It was as though they were already planning something behind my back. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Morning, Mom," I said, forcing a smile. I looked at Charles, trying to keep my composure. "Morning, Rebecca," my mother replied, her voice softer than usual. But it was her eyes that caught me off guard. They were colder than I had ever seen them before. There was no warmth, no familiar comfort that had always been there when she looked at me. "We were just discussing some family matters," she continued, her tone matter of fact. "You're an adult now, Rebecca. You need to understand that things are changing." I froze, feeling the weight of her words settle on my chest like a heavy stone. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice betraying none of the storm brewing inside me. Charles smiled, his lips curling in that unsettling way. "Your mother and I have decided to start fresh. We'll be making some adjustments to the family's finances." "Adjustments?" My heart raced as I forced the word out. "What kind of adjustments?" "Well," my mother began, her voice slipping into a cold, businesslike tone. "Charles and I have decided that it's time to put the family wealth in order. We'll be sharing it with his children as well." I could barely comprehend what I was hearing. The world felt like it was spinning around me, my father's legacy slipping through my fingers like sand. "Mom," I started, my voice shaking. "What are you saying? That everything Dad worked for, everything he left behind, it's just gone to them?" Her gaze didn't waver. "You have to understand, Rebecca, things have changed. I can't keep everything for just one person anymore. I have to think about my future, about Charles' future." The words hit me like a slap, but it wasn't the words themselves that cut so deeply. It was the finality in her tone, the cold indifference that made it clear she had made up her mind long ago. This wasn't just a casual decision, it was a betrayal. I felt a surge of anger rising inside me, but I knew that if I allowed myself to react now, it would be over. I had to stay calm, stay focused. I had prepared for this moment, even if I hadn't known when it would come. With a deep breath, I straightened my back, my face cold and composed. "I see," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the fury churning inside me. "Well, if that's what you want, then so be it. But understand this, Mom, you've made a terrible mistake." For a moment, there was silence. My mother's eyes flickered, as if she was trying to gauge my reaction. But she said nothing more. Charles just smiled, that same unnerving smile that made me want to lash out. I turned on my heel and walked out of the room without another word. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I didn't let it show. I had a plan, and now more than ever, I needed to execute it. The moment I stepped outside, the weight of what had just happened settled in. But as the anger surged inside me, so did something else. A cold, calculating resolve. I would take back what was rightfully mine. I would expose her, make her see that she couldn't get away with this. I had nothing to lose now. And with that thought, I set my sights on what was next. My mother would never see it coming. The silence of the night was suffocating. After the confrontation in the living room, I retreated to my bedroom, the anger boiling in my chest. But I didn't let it show. I knew that acting rashly would be my downfall. No, I had to be calculated. Every move from here on out would be a step towards reclaiming what was mine, a step towards exposing the betrayal that ran deeper than I could have ever imagined. I sat at my desk, staring at the papers strewn across it. Notes, old family records, my father's will. The will, that was the key. My mind raced as I thought back to what I had seen when my father's lawyer had read the document aloud after his death. The words had been clear: his estate was to go to me. I was his only child, his only heir. But somewhere along the way, it had all changed. The wealth I had been promised was slipping through my fingers, and I was standing on the edge, watching it fall. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. I reached for my phone, dialing the number of the lawyer who had helped my father with his affairs. His voice on the other end was calm, familiar, but there was something in his tone that made me uneasy. "Rebecca, it's been a while," he said, his voice laced with an odd hesitation. "How can I help?" "Mr. Duncan," I began, keeping my voice steady. "I need to know something. When my father passed away, the will was clear. I was to inherit everything, right?" There was a pause, too long of one. "Yes," he finally said, his voice cautious. "But, Rebecca, there's something you should know. There have been some changes since your father's death." My heart stopped. "Changes?" I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "What do you mean?" "I can't go into details over the phone," he said, "but your mother has been in touch with me, and there are additional instructions. Your father's will isn't the only document in play here. You should come in and speak with me in person." The air felt thick with tension. I didn't want to think about what those additional instructions might be, but I knew they were tied to what was happening now. My mother had orchestrated this, and she wasn't going to stop until everything that belonged to me was in her hands. "I'll be there tomorrow," I said, my voice tight. "Don't do anything until I get there." After hanging up, I took a deep breath. It was clear now. My mother had been more than just cold and distant after my father's death. She had been plotting, scheming, and slowly inching her way toward her ultimate goal. But she wouldn't get away with it. Not if I had anything to say about it. The next morning, I walked into the law office with a quiet resolve. Mr. Duncan's office was tucked away in the back of the building, a cozy space filled with dark wood furniture and the faint smell of coffee. It was the kind of place where people came to sign away their legacies, and in my case, I was there to reclaim mine. When he motioned for me to sit, I did so without hesitation. Mr. Duncan's eyes were tired, and the lines on his face were deeper than I remembered. The stress of the past few months had clearly taken its toll on him, but he couldn't know what it felt like for me. My entire future had been ripped away in the blink of an eye. "Rebecca," he began, his voice low, "I wish I had better news for you, but your mother has made some decisions that I wasn't expecting." He handed me a folder filled with papers, documents I had never seen before. As I flipped through them, I saw that they were signed by both my mother and Charles. My blood ran cold. "These documents are changes to your father's will. They were executed shortly after his death," Mr. Duncan continued, his voice apologetic but firm. "It appears your mother had the legal authority to make certain amendments, but I never expected her to take such drastic measures." "What do you mean by drastic measures?" I asked, barely able to hold my composure. "The majority of the estate, Rebecca. It's being transferred to Charles and his children. The assets that were meant for you have been reallocated. It's all in these papers." My hands shook as I looked at the pages, the words blurring in front of me. How had she done this? How had my mother, the one person I trusted most, been capable of something so cold and calculating? Mr. Duncan's voice was gentle as he added, "Rebecca, you have a right to challenge these changes, but it will be a long and difficult process." Your mother is well within her rights, legally, to make these decisions. The anger that had been building inside me exploded. My mother had been playing me, and now she was using the law against me. But I wasn't about to let her win. "I'll fight her," I said, the words coming out of my mouth before I even realized what I was saying. "I'll take this to court if I have to, but I need you to help me. I need everything, every piece of evidence you have. I'm not leaving here without it." Mr. Duncan didn't hesitate. He nodded slowly, understanding the determination in my voice. "I'll give you everything, Rebecca, but you have to know this won't be easy. Your mother has a strong case. You're not just fighting her, you're fighting the law itself." I stood up, my resolve hardening. "Then let's fight. I'm not backing down." That was the moment I realized that this wasn't just about money or inheritance anymore. It was about power, about control, and about reclaiming what was rightfully mine. And nothing, no one was going to stop me from taking it back. The next few days were a blur of documents, meetings, and phone calls. The walls of my mother's betrayal were closing in on me, but I couldn't afford to let the weight of it overwhelm me. Not yet. The truth was, I had been living in a carefully crafted lie for far too long, and now I had to navigate the labyrinth of deceit that my mother had built around me. I spent hours at Mr. Duncan's office, poring over the papers he had given me. Every page was a new revelation, a new twist in the tangled mess my mother had created. The documents weren't just changes to the will, they were proof of her manipulation. My father had trusted her implicitly, and now I was staring at the wreckage of that trust. I didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal of my mother or the fact that my father, in his final moments, hadn't seen this coming. I couldn't help but wonder if he had known something I didn't, if he had sensed the coldness in my mother that I had been blind to for so long. But I couldn't afford to dwell on that now. I needed to focus. My mind raced as I planned my next steps. I would challenge this in court, yes, but I couldn't simply rely on the legal process to right this wrong. I had to get inside my mother's mind, understand her motivations, and find out how far she was willing to go to cover her tracks. I would need allies, and I would need to play this game like a master strategist. But where could I begin? The first place that came to mind was Sarah, my mother's best friend, someone who had been in our lives for years. She had always been a neutral figure, never too involved, but close enough to have seen the dynamics between my parents. I wasn't sure if she knew anything, but if anyone could give me some insight into what was really going on, it was Sarah. I arranged to meet her at a cafe in the city. It was a quiet place, a corner booth with the kind of low lighting that made conversations feel intimate. Sarah looked exactly as I remembered, polished, poised, with that ever-present smile that always made people trust her. She greeted me warmly, but I could tell something was off. There was a nervousness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Rebecca," she said softly as I sat down, "how are you holding up? I can't imagine what you're going through right now." I forced a smile, trying to appear composed, but underneath I was seething. "I'm managing, Sarah, but I need to talk to you about something I think you might know more about than you're letting on." Her expression changed instantly, the warmth in her eyes replaced by wariness. "What do you mean?" "I know my mother has been in contact with you," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I know she's been making decisions about the estate, and I need to know what's really going on. I need you to tell me the truth." Sarah looked down at her coffee, her fingers tracing the rim of the cup as she hesitated. I could tell she was weighing her options, trying to decide how much to reveal. After a long moment, she finally spoke. "Rebecca, I don't know if I can help you," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your mother is different now. I've tried talking to her, tried understanding her, but she's not the person she used to be. It's like she's someone else entirely. I don't know what's going on, but I know it's bad. I've seen the way she's been acting lately. It's not like her." I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. "What do you mean? How has she been acting?" Sarah sighed, looking around nervously before she continued. "She's more distant, cold even. When she talks about Charles, it's like she's obsessed with him. And when it comes to you, Rebecca, it's like she's shut you out completely. She doesn't want to hear your side, doesn't want to listen to you at all. She's so focused on protecting him and his children that she's blinded herself to everything else." I felt a coldness spread through me. This wasn't just about the money anymore. This was about something deeper, something darker. My mother had lost herself in this relationship with Charles, and in doing so, she had lost me too. Did she ever say anything about changing the will? About the estate? I pressed. Sarah shook her head, looking guilty. I don't know the details, but I do know that your mother has been pushing for the changes for a while now. She's been seeing lawyers, making plans. I think she's trying to secure her future. And Charles' future too. But I didn't think she'd go this far. I sat back, absorbing everything Sarah had just told me. My mother wasn't just betraying me. She was so consumed by her new life with Charles that she was willing to sacrifice everything I had ever known, for the illusion of security. But now I had a clearer picture. My next move was obvious. I had to confront my mother, but this time, it wouldn't be about trying to appeal to her emotions or reason with her. I had to expose her, make her see the damage she had caused, and take back what was mine. The game was no longer about inheritance. It was about control, and I would stop at nothing to reclaim it. I thanked Sarah for her help, though I knew deep down that her involvement in this was more than I could trust. She had her own loyalties, and those loyalties were now tied to my mother. As I left the cafe, the weight of what I had to do next pressed heavily on my shoulders. I wasn't going to let this slide, not without a fight. And this fight, I knew, would take everything I had, but in the end, it would be worth it. My mother would see that I wasn't someone she could easily cast aside. She had underestimated me, and now she would pay the price. The web of lies she had spun around me was starting to unravel, and there was no way I was going to let her get away with it. The truth would come to light, and I would be the one to make sure of it. The air felt thick with tension as I prepared for the next step. I had already learned more than I ever wanted to know, but now I needed to confront my mother. I had to put everything on the line, no more avoiding the truth, no more silence. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about standing up for what was mine, for what my father had built, and for the woman my mother used to be. I spent the night organizing my thoughts, making sure I was ready for whatever confrontation lay ahead. The evidence was clear. My mother had betrayed me. The papers I'd seen at Mr. Duncan's office were enough to expose her, documents that linked her to the decision-making process, the transfer of assets, the manipulation of the family estate. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. To truly make my case, I needed more witnesses, testimonies, everything I could get to turn the tide in my favor. As the sun dipped below the horizon the following evening, I stood in front of my mother's house. It was the same place I had grown up, the same place where I had shared countless memories with my father. But now, it felt like a fortress, one that I had to breach if I wanted to reclaim what was mine. I rang the doorbell, my heart pounding in my chest. A few moments later, the door opened, and my mother stood there. She looked just as composed as ever, though I could see the faintest trace of unease in her eyes. "Rebecca," she said, her voice calm but carrying a coldness that made my stomach tight. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," I said firmly, stepping past her without waiting for an invitation. I wasn't here to be polite. I wasn't here to beg. I was here to confront her. She frowned but didn't stop me. "Come inside then." The moment I crossed the threshold, the familiar scent of home hit me, old wood leather, the faint smell of my father's cologne. It felt surreal, like stepping into a different world, one that no longer held the warmth it once had. We sat in the living room, the same space where my father had once entertained guests, where we had shared our meals, our laughs, our lives. But now it was sterile, empty of the life it used to hold. My mother sat on one of the armchairs, and I took the seat opposite her. The silence between us felt thick, suffocating, as if the very air was pregnant with the weight of everything unsaid. "Mom," I began, my voice steady despite the storm inside me, "I know what you've done." Her eyes flickered with uncertainty, but she quickly masked it. "I don't know what you mean." I placed the stack of papers from Mr. Duncan's office on the coffee table between us, watching as her eyes locked onto them. Her face betrayed nothing, but I could tell she was panicking on the inside. "You've been making changes to the will, to the estate. You've been shifting everything to Charles and his children, haven't you?" I continued, my voice colder now. "You've been preparing for this moment for months, planning to strip me of what's rightfully mine. All of it, the house, the assets, everything." My mother didn't respond immediately. She sat back in her chair, folding her arms as if she were trying to gain some control over the situation. Then, after a long pause, she spoke, her voice tight but controlled. "Rebecca, you don't understand. You're not a child anymore. You're an adult. I'm trying to secure a future for myself, for us. I did what I had to do. No, you didn't, I countered, my voice rising slightly. You betrayed me. You betrayed everything we've built. You've been lying to me, and you've been lying to yourself. This isn't about securing a future, Mom. This is about your obsession with Charles and his children. You're so blinded by him that you're willing to destroy everything we've ever had. Her expression hardened, her jaw tightening. You don't know anything about what I'm going through. You don't know what it's like to start over, to rebuild your life after losing someone. You're right, Rebecca. I did what I had to do. But you're not my priority anymore. I have to think about my own happiness now. Her words hit me like a slap. She had chosen him. She had chosen them over me. I had been nothing more than a pawn in her new life, a casualty of her obsession with her new family. The mother I had known, the woman who had always put me first, was gone. I felt my throat tighten, but I pushed the tears back. I couldn't afford to show weakness. Not now, not in front of her. You're wrong, Mom, I said quietly, my voice calm but laced with venom. You've made your choice, and now you'll have to live with the consequences. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. My mother's gaze followed me, but she didn't move. She didn't even speak. I'll make sure everyone knows the truth, I said, turning to face her one last time. I'm taking this to court. You'll pay for what you've done. I'll expose you for what you really are. I turned and walked out of the house, my heart pounding in my chest. As the door slammed behind me, I felt a sense of finality wash over me. The battle had just begun, but there was no turning back now. I would expose her lies. I would reclaim what was mine. And I would make her see that she couldn't just erase me from her life. As I stepped into the cold night air, I knew that the war was far from over. But I was ready. I had my plan. And this time, nothing would stop me. The days that followed were a whirlwind of frantic calls, late nights at Mr. Duncan's office, and strategizing my every move. The shock of confronting my mother still lingered, but the anger had started to fuel something else, something sharper, more determined. I was done being the passive bystander in my own life. Now I was in control, and nothing was going to stop me from taking back what was rightfully mine. I filed the legal documents to contest my mother's changes to my father's will. It was the first step in what I knew would be a long, grueling battle, but there was no other choice. I couldn't let my mother erase my inheritance, my birthright, just to satisfy her new husband's greed. And I wasn't going to let her get away with using me as a pawn in her new family dynamic. But even with the legal process underway, the tension between my mother and me had escalated. She wasn't just fighting for the estate anymore, she was fighting for her own pride. I could feel the Cold War between us tightening with every passing day. She had never been one to back down easily, and I knew she would fight me with everything she had. Still, I couldn't back out now. This wasn't just about money, it was about showing her that I wasn't a child anymore. I had my own strength, my own power, and I would use it. I had done my research, gathered all the documents I could find, and enlisted the help of witnesses who could speak to my mother's sudden shift in behavior. But the one thing I needed most, something I hadn't yet uncovered, was the truth about the extent of her involvement with Charles. My mother had been so careful, so methodical in covering her tracks, that it was like she had anticipated every move I might make. I couldn't afford to miss anything. That's when I decided to meet with someone I had been avoiding, my father's old business partner, Thomas Reed. Thomas had been close to my father for decades, and his influence in the company had always been significant. If anyone knew the truth about my mother's involvement in the estate's affairs, it was him. The problem was that he was just as much of a mystery to me as my mother had become. He had distanced himself from the family after my father's death, but I knew he still had ties to the business, and, by extension, to the assets that I was now fighting for. I found Thomas in his office, an old building tucked away in the financial district of Atlanta. The place smelled of mahogany and leather, with the faintest scent of cigar smoke lingering in the air. He looked the same as I remembered, stoic, with sharp eyes that seemed to assess everything in the room before anyone had a chance to speak. When he saw me, he didn't flinch. Instead, he set down the papers in front of him and gave me a long, appraising look. "Rebecca," he said, his voice as low and steady as ever. "What brings you here? I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I need to know the truth, Thomas. About my mother, about Charles, and about the estate." He raised an eyebrow but didn't respond immediately. His gaze shifted to the window, where the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his desk. For a moment, I thought he might dismiss me, but then he leaned forward, his expression hardening. "Your mother has always been shrewd," he said quietly, his voice laced with bitterness. "But Charles, he's a different animal entirely." I felt a cold pit form in my stomach at his words. "What do you mean?" "He's not just after the money," Thomas continued, his eyes narrowing. "He's after control. When your father passed away, he saw an opportunity, one he wasn't going to let slip through his fingers. And your mother? Well, she wasn't blind to it. She saw the same thing. It's not about love, Rebecca. It never was. It's about power." I felt a rush of nausea. My mother, the woman I had always trusted, had been manipulated by a man she barely knew. All for the sake of power. It was almost too much to bear. Did she know about the changes to the will? Did she know about the transfers? I pressed. Thomas hesitated for a moment before answering. She knew. She was involved in it. But I don't think she realized how far Charles would go. She thought she was doing what was best for everyone. But now it's all about keeping him happy. And the more she indulges him, the more she loses sight of everything she once cared about, her family, her legacy, and you. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. The woman I had called mother was gone, replaced by someone who had let herself be swallowed whole by Charles's ambition. She had traded everything I had ever known for a future with him. "How do you know all of this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Thomas leaned back in his chair, his face hardening. "I've seen the way she's changed. I've been watching from the sidelines. When your father was alive, we had an understanding. But after his death, it all fell apart. She started distancing herself from me, from everything. And then Charles came into the picture. Suddenly, she had different priorities." I stood there for a moment, absorbing what he had just said. My mother's descent into this twisted reality had been slow, but now I saw it for what it was. A calculated decision to secure her own place, her own future, with no regard for the damage she had caused in the process. "Thank you, Thomas," I said quietly. "I'll make sure everyone knows the truth." As I left his office, the weight of what I had learned settled over me. This fight was no longer just about reclaiming what was mine. It was about revealing my mother for who she truly was, about showing the world the extent of her betrayal. The battle lines had been drawn, and there was no going back. I had no more time to waste. I had the pieces of the puzzle. Now, I had to put them all together and expose her for the world to see. This was the point of no return, and I was ready for whatever came next. The days passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and frantic preparations. The battle for my father's estate had become more than just a legal matter. It had become a war, one where every word, every action, had the power to change the course of the future. I had gathered the evidence, and now I had to be strategic. My mother had taken everything I had ever known and twisted it into something unrecognizable. But I wouldn't let her win, not like this. I had made my decision. It was time to go public. The first step was to meet with the press. I knew that bringing the truth to light would make the fight more difficult, but I had no other choice. If I wanted to ensure my mother couldn't sweep this under the rug, I needed to make sure the world knew what she had done. I wasn't going to stand by and let her manipulate the narrative. I called a press conference. The media swarm outside the building felt like 1,000 eyes staring at me, watching my every move. The weight of it pressed down on me, but I didn't falter. I couldn't. I had to show the world that I wasn't the helpless daughter I once was. I was a woman with a plan, with a purpose, and I would stop at nothing to make things right. When I stepped into the room, I could feel the tension in the air. Dozens of journalists, photographers, and camera operators were packed into the space, their eyes on me. The spotlight was blinding, but I kept my focus. I had a message, and it was one that would change everything. I stood at the podium, the microphone in front of me feeling like the only thing anchoring me to the ground. I looked at the sea of faces staring back, their eyes expectant, waiting for me to speak. I took a deep breath and began. "Thank you all for coming today," I said, my voice steady. "I've called this press conference to speak the truth about what has been happening behind closed doors in my family. For months, I've been trying to understand what happened to the legacy my father left behind. What should have been my inheritance, what should have been rightfully mine, has been taken from me by my own mother. And now, I'm here to make sure the world knows what's been happening." I paused, watching the reporters scribble notes furiously. Their attention was mine, but I needed to make sure I didn't just capture their interest. I needed to make them understand the gravity of the situation. My mother, I continued, has taken control of my father's estate, making decisions without my knowledge, without my consent. She's transferred assets to her new husband, Charles, and his children in a blatant attempt to remove me from the equation. And the worst part is, she's done it all while pretending to care about me, while pretending to be the mother I once knew. The room was silent. You could hear a pin drop as the weight of my words settled over the crowd. I could feel the eyes on me, the cameras flashing, but I didn't break my gaze. This isn't just about money. This isn't about what I stand to lose, I said, my voice growing stronger. This is about betrayal. This is about family. My father trusted my mother, and she's destroyed everything he worked for. She's destroyed our legacy, and I won't stand by and let her erase me from it. I could see the journalists exchanging glances, their pens flying across their notepads. The questions would come soon, but I wasn't finished yet. There was one last thing I had to say. I've filed a legal challenge to the changes made to my father's will, I continued, and I will make sure that everything my father worked for is returned to its rightful place. I won't let anyone, not even my mother, take that from me. I will fight for what's mine, for what's just. With that, I stepped back from the podium, and the floodgates opened. The reporters were on me, firing questions from every direction. The room erupted with noise, but I didn't falter. I answered each question with the same calm resolve I had prepared for weeks. I knew what I was doing, and I knew I was on the right side of this fight. The aftermath of the press conference was immediate and overwhelming. News outlets across the country picked up the story. Headlines screamed about the heiress fighting her own mother and the family betrayal that rocked Atlanta. For the first time in months, I felt like I had control over the situation. The world was watching now, and my mother couldn't hide behind her facade anymore. But even as the press buzzed and the public's interest grew, I knew that the real battle was just beginning. My mother wasn't going to back down easily. She had the resources, the influence, and the resolve to fight this to the bitter end. But I had something she didn't, the truth, and I was ready to use it. The next day, I received an unexpected visit from Charles. I was sitting in my apartment when the doorbell rang, and when I opened it, there he stood, tall, imposing, his face as cold as ever. He didn't look surprised to see me. If anything, it was as if he had been expecting me to take this step. "Rebecca," he said with a tight smile, "I think we need to talk." "About what?" I replied, my voice ice cold. "About your manipulation. About the lies you and my mother have been spreading." He didn't flinch at my accusation. "I think you're going about this the wrong way," he said, his voice calm and measured. "You're making a lot of noise, but you're not thinking clearly. You're playing into a narrative that's only going to hurt you." "I'm not playing into any narrative," I snapped, my anger rising. "I'm exposing the truth." Charles stepped closer, his presence oppressive. The truth is you've always been spoiled, always taken everything for granted. You never had to fight for anything in your life. And now, you're throwing everything away for what? A few more dollars." His words stung, but I held my ground. "This isn't about money. This is about family. This is about respect. You'll never understand that because you've never had to earn anything. You've only ever taken." Charles laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. "You think you're going to win this, Rebecca? You think you can take everything from us and walk away unscathed. It's not going to happen." "I'm not walking away, Charles," I said, my voice low and steady. "This is only just the beginning." With that, I slammed the door in his face, my heart pounding with fury. He was right about one thing: I wasn't going to win easily. But I wasn't going to lose either. The stakes had been raised, and there was no turning back. The days after Charles's visit felt like a slow burn. I could feel the tension mounting, but I wasn't about to let him, or anyone else, intimidate me. I had already exposed the truth. Now I had to make sure the world knew the full extent of my mother's betrayal. The legal battle would continue, of course, but with every passing day, it felt more like a game of chess, one where I had to think 3 steps ahead. And with each move, I was becoming more certain that my mother had underestimated me. I couldn't afford to let my emotions get the better of me anymore. Every day, I found myself replaying the conversation with Charles in my mind. His words, cold and calculated, had struck at something deep within me. The way he dismissed my pain, my fight, made me realize just how far he was willing to go to get what he wanted. But it also made me even more determined. If he thought I would back down, he was wrong. I spent the next few days digging deeper. I reached out to people who had known my mother and father, anyone who might have witnessed something that could strengthen my case. I needed to prove that my mother's actions weren't just about securing her future, they were about her complete disregard for me. And there was one person who could help me with that, someone who had been a silent observer for years, someone who knew all the dark corners of our family's history. I made the call to my father's old assistant, Nancy. Nancy had worked for my father for decades, handling everything from meetings to personal matters. She had always been quiet, reserved, but I knew she had a sharp mind and a keen eye for detail. If anyone had seen the cracks in the foundation of our family, it was her. When I met her in a small cafe near her apartment, she was just as I remembered, neatly dressed, her dark eyes hiding years of experience and quiet judgment. She looked up when I approached, offering me a small but genuine smile. But as soon as I sat down, her expression shifted, becoming more serious. "Rebecca," she said, her voice soft but firm, "I know why you're here. I didn't waste time. I need to know everything, Nancy. Everything you've seen, everything you've heard. My mother's been hiding things for years, and now I need to know just how far she's willing to go to get what she wants." Nancy hesitated for a moment, as though weighing her options, but then her face softened. "I've seen a lot over the years, Rebecca. I always tried to stay out of it. Your father trusted your mother, and I respected that. But I also saw things that made me uncomfortable, things that I couldn't ignore." I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "What things?" "There were times," she began slowly, "when I'd overhear your mother talking to Charles. They'd be in the study late at night, and the conversations would get heated. I never could catch all the details, but I heard enough to know that your mother was changing. She was more focused on him than she ever was on your father, and it seemed like she was willing to do anything to make him happy. But I never knew she'd go this far." I felt my stomach twist. "What do you mean by go this far?" Nancy took a deep breath. I heard her talk about transferring assets, reworking the family business. She was worried about the company's future, but not in the way you'd expect. She was more concerned about securing Charles's future, about making sure he got what he wanted. Your father would have never allowed that. It felt like the ground beneath me was crumbling. This wasn't just about money or inheritance anymore. This was about the very essence of the family my father had worked so hard to build, and my mother had sold it out. "You have to tell me everything, Nancy," I insisted, my voice more urgent now. "What exactly did she plan? What was she doing with Charles?" Nancy hesitated for a long moment before speaking again. "I don't know all the details, but I do know she started moving things around without telling your father. She was making deals, signing papers, rearranging things to benefit Charles and his children. It was like she was already planning for a future without your father, like he was never even in the picture. I tried to talk to her about it once, but she shut me down. After that, I knew I had to stay out of it. I sat back, processing everything Nancy had just told me. My mother had been playing a dangerous game, and she had done it in the shadows, behind closed doors. And now, the truth was coming to light. But it wasn't just the legal fight I had to worry about anymore. There was something darker at play here, something that made this whole situation feel like a ticking time bomb. I knew I had to act quickly. The following week, I sat in Mr. Duncan's office, the weight of the evidence I had gathered pressing down on me. The legal battle was heating up, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. I needed something more, something that would give me the upper hand. I needed a final piece of the puzzle, something that would turn the tide completely in my favor. And then it came. A package arrived at my door early one morning. Inside was a letter, along with a set of photographs that would change everything. They were from a private investigator I had hired weeks earlier, someone I trusted to follow the trail that my mother and Charles had so carefully hidden. The photos were damning, clear images of my mother and Charles, meeting in secret with a group of financial advisors, discussing ways to bypass legal checks and make the estate transfers even more permanent. These weren't just idle meetings, they were calculated steps in a plan to steal what wasn't theirs. I felt a rush of vindication as I looked at the photographs. This was it. This was the evidence I needed to bury them both. With this in hand, I knew I could expose them for what they really were, opportunists who cared only about their own power and control. I called Mr. Duncan immediately. "I have what we need," I said, my voice steady, but filled with the satisfaction of knowing I had the upper hand. "It's time to finish this." As I hung up the phone, I felt the weight of the fight lifting from my shoulders. This was far from over, but I had the truth. And with that truth, I was going to take everything back. The days that followed were a blur of preparation. The photographs had provided the final piece of the puzzle, and with them, I knew I had the evidence that could crush my mother's defense. I felt a sense of control return to me, the power of the truth coursing through my veins. It wasn't just about reclaiming my inheritance anymore. It was about exposing my mother for what she had become, and making sure that Charles and his children paid for what they'd done to my family. I sat in Mr. Duncan's office, a pile of documents before me. The photos, the will, the legal records, all of it now belonged to me. It was all part of the case I was preparing, and every move I made felt like one step closer to a final victory. My hands were steady, my mind sharp. I knew what needed to be done, and I wasn't going to stop until I had everything back. "Rebecca, are you sure about this?" Mr. Duncan asked, breaking my concentration. He was sitting across from me, studying me with a mixture of concern and respect. "This will go public, and once it does, there's no turning back." I met his gaze. "There's nothing left to hide. She's made her choice, and now I'll make mine." He nodded slowly, understanding. "All right, we'll file everything tomorrow. I'll make sure the press gets their hands on it." The decision was made. There was no backing down now. I had prepared every aspect of this, from the legal documents to the public relations strategy. The truth would be unveiled, and my mother would have to face the consequences. The next day, we filed the official complaint in court. I could feel the weight of the moment. As soon as the documents were submitted, the gears of the legal system would start turning. But more than just the legal battle, the press had already picked up the story. The images of my mother and Charles, caught in secret meetings and planning the illegal transfer of assets, were now in the hands of journalists, and the world was watching. The following evening, I sat at my apartment, staring at my phone. The notifications had started flooding in. News outlets, blogs, social media, everyone was talking about the heiress who had taken on her own mother. The media was hungry for more, and I had given them what they wanted. They called it the family betrayal of the decade. But I didn't care about the headlines. This wasn't for them. This was for me. This was my fight, and I was going to win. Suddenly, the phone rang. I glanced at the screen. It was my mother's number. My heart didn't skip a beat. It had been days since we last spoke, but I knew this call was coming. She had to know her time was running out. I answered the phone, my voice cold. "Hello, Mother." "Rebecca," she said, her voice tight with anger, but there was a tremor of fear underneath. "I can't believe you're doing this. You're going to ruin everything. You're going to tear this family apart." "You did that," I replied, my words sharp. "You tore this family apart the moment you decided to put Charles ahead of me. You took everything I had, everything I've ever worked for, and you gave it to him. And now, I'm taking it back." "I never wanted it to be like this," she said, her voice breaking. "You don't understand. I was just trying to protect myself. After your father died, I didn't know what to do. Charles gave me stability. He gave me comfort." "Comfort?" I repeated, incredulous. "You destroyed our family for comfort. You sold out everything for a man who doesn't care about you, and you dragged me into your mess." There was silence on the other end. For a moment, I thought she had hung up, but then I heard her voice again, softer this time, almost pleading. "I didn't know who else to turn to, Rebecca. I was scared. I thought I was doing the right thing." "No," I said, my voice steady but resolute. "You weren't, and now it's time to face the consequences." "You don't know what you're doing, Rebecca," she said, her voice shaking. "You'll regret this." "No, I won't," I replied coldly, "because I'm done being the one who's always left in the dark. I'm done being the one you walk all over. You may have been able to manipulate me before, but not anymore." She didn't respond. The silence stretched on, thick and uncomfortable, before she finally spoke. And with that, she hung up. I sat there for a moment, the phone still pressed to my ear. There was a cold emptiness in her words. No remorse, no apology. Just a desperate attempt to justify her actions. But I didn't feel sorry for her. I couldn't. The next few days were a whirlwind of legal meetings, press coverage, and public appearances. The media circus around my family's implosion was impossible to ignore. Headlines screamed about the betrayal, the legal drama, and the fight between mother and daughter. But through it all, I kept my focus. I had come too far to let anything distract me now. The court battle was heating up, and I knew that my mother and Charles were going to fight back with everything they had. But I was ready for it. I had my evidence. I had the truth. The day of the court hearing arrived. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. I could feel the eyes of the public on me, the weight of their expectations. But I didn't falter. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for the legacy my father had left behind, and I wasn't going to let anyone erase it. When my mother and Charles walked into the courtroom, my heart skipped a beat. My mother looked different. Her face was pale, her shoulders slumped, as if she knew the end was near. Charles, on the other hand, wore that same smug expression, as though he still believed he could win this. But I was ready, and I wouldn't let them get away with it. The trial began. The legal arguments flew, but the truth was on my side. Every piece of evidence, every document, every photo, it was all coming together. The prosecution laid out the facts, and I could see my mother's resolve crumbling. I knew she was starting to realize that she couldn't hide from the truth anymore. The final blow came when Mr. Duncan presented the photographs of my mother and Charles, caught in the act of conspiring to change the will and transfer assets. The gasps in the courtroom were audible as the images were shown to everyone. There was no way out for them now. As the judge prepared to make his ruling, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I had done it. The truth had come to light, and the justice I had fought for was finally within reach. My mother and Charles could no longer manipulate the situation. The game was over, and I had won. The court was silent, a tension hanging in the air as the judge looked over the documents one last time. My heart pounded in my chest, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself a deep breath. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. My mother's lies, Charles's manipulation, everything was coming out into the open. It was all happening, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt in control. I glanced across the room at my mother. She sat slumped in her seat, her eyes fixed on the floor, the weight of the proceedings bearing down on her. Charles, on the other hand, looked uncharacteristically tense, his face a mask of anger and disbelief. He had been so confident, so sure that he could outmaneuver me. But the evidence was undeniable. The judge's voice broke through the silence, and the room fell still. After reviewing the evidence presented, including the photographs and witness testimonies, it is clear that the defendant, Rebecca Wilson's mother, has engaged in acts of fraud and manipulation concerning the family estate. The alterations made to the will, the transfer of assets, and the conspiracy with Charles to further these actions constitute a breach of trust and legal wrongdoing. Therefore, I find in favor of the plaintiff, Rebecca Wilson, and order the immediate reversal of the fraudulent changes to the will. The words hit me like a wave, the victory slowly sinking in. I could hardly believe it. After everything, every sleepless night, every agonizing moment, I had won. The inheritance was mine. The family legacy my father had built was restored to its rightful heir. But the victory didn't feel as sweet as I expected. As the judge continued to speak, I found myself staring at my mother. Her face had drained of color, her eyes hollow. She wasn't the woman I had once trusted, she wasn't the mother I had known. And that realization hit harder than anything else. I had won the legal battle, yes, but my relationship with her, the bond I once held so dear, had been shattered beyond repair. I felt a hand on my shoulder, and I turned to see Mr. Duncan standing beside me, offering a brief, reassuring smile. "You did it, Rebecca," he said softly. "Justice has been served," but I wasn't ready to celebrate. The court ruling may have been a triumph, but the emotional cost was something I hadn't prepared for. As I walked out of the courtroom, the weight of the moment was still settling in. The years of trust I had placed in my mother had been destroyed, and no amount of money or legal victory could ever fix that. The days that followed were a blur of media interviews, legal paperwork, and public attention. News outlets across the country had picked up the story, and I found myself becoming the center of a media storm. Headlines screamed about the heiress who took on her mother, and the coverage was relentless. But it was all part of the process. It had to be. I spent most of my time in my apartment trying to process everything that had happened. I knew I had done the right thing, but it didn't change the fact that my mother was no longer a part of my life. The person I once called family had become a stranger. And in the quiet moments, I wondered if there would ever be a time when I could heal from the damage she had caused. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. I hesitated for a moment before answering, knowing exactly who it was. Rebecca, my mother's voice crackled through the line, her tone heavy with regret. I need to talk to you." I didn't want to pick up the phone. I didn't want to hear her voice, didn't want to listen to her explain away her actions again. But something inside me told me I had to hear her out. It was the last piece of the puzzle, the last chance for closure. "Go ahead," I said, my voice cold but composed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I've made so many mistakes and I don't know how to fix it. I was wrong to do what I did. I betrayed you, and I hate myself for it." I remained silent for a moment, trying to find the right words. "You hurt me, Mom," I finally said, my voice quieter now. "You took everything from me. You turned your back on me for him. And now, I don't know who you are anymore." "I don't expect you to forgive me," she replied, her voice trembling. "But I need you to know that I never wanted it to come to this. I never wanted to destroy what we had." I closed my eyes, letting her words wash over me. But even as she spoke, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. I didn't need her apology. What I needed was to rebuild my own life, to move on from the years of lies and manipulation. Her betrayal had left a scar, one that couldn't be healed with words or apologies. The truth was, I had to let go of the mother I once knew in order to find peace. "I can't do this anymore," I said quietly, the weight of the decision settling in. "I can't keep pretending like everything's okay. You made your choice, and now I have to make mine." There was a long pause before she spoke again. "I understand, Rebecca. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I love you, and I always will, even if I don't deserve your forgiveness." Her words were heavy, and for a moment, I felt the familiar pang of sorrow. But I didn't let it show. I had already made my choice. "I have to go," I said, my voice firm. "Goodbye, Mom," and with that, I ended the call. The months that followed were a period of transformation. I took control of the family estate, rebuilding everything that had been lost. I reconnected with old friends, focusing on building a future without the shadows of the past looming over me. I realized that the inheritance I had fought for was more than just money or property. It was my way of reclaiming my life, of proving that I could stand on my own 2 feet. The battles I had fought, both in court and within myself, had made me stronger. And in the end, I came out on top. But as I looked out over the city of Atlanta, I knew one thing for certain. The woman I had been before this fight was gone. And in her place stood someone new, a woman who had fought for everything she had, and who would never let anyone take that away from her again. Months had passed since the court ruling, and the world had moved on, as it always does. The media frenzy that had once followed me like a shadow had faded, leaving me to rebuild not only the family estate, but also my own sense of self. The aftermath had been painful, but it had also been liberating. I had reclaimed what was mine, not just in terms of inheritance, but in terms of my dignity, my independence, and my future. I stood in front of the window of my new office, overlooking the city of Atlanta. The skyline stretched out before me, a symbol of the new chapter in my life that I was finally ready to embrace. The weight of the past no longer felt as heavy. I had faced my demons, had confronted my mother, and had fought for everything I believed in. I had won, but in the end, it was never about the victory itself. It was about who I became in the process. Behind me, I heard the sound of the door opening, followed by footsteps. I turned to see Mr. Duncan entering the room, his familiar smile on his face. He had been my trusted ally throughout the legal battle, and today he brought the final piece of the puzzle. "You did it, Rebecca," he said, his voice warm with approval. "You came through it all. I'm proud of you." I smiled, though it was a quiet, reflective smile. "I don't think I could have done it without your help, Mr. Duncan." He waved off the compliment. "You did the hard part, you stood your ground, the rest. Well, that's just paperwork and legal jargon." I laughed, a genuine laugh that felt good after everything I had been through. The tension that had weighed me down for so long was starting to lift. The past was no longer a burden. It had become a part of my history, something I could learn from, but not something that defined me anymore. Mr. Duncan set a file down on the desk in front of me. "This is it. The last of the legal documents. It's all officially yours, Rebecca." I opened the file slowly, taking in the familiar names of the estate, the businesses, and the assets I had fought so hard to reclaim. There was a finality to it now, a sense of closure that I hadn't realized I needed until this very moment. It was done. My father's legacy was safe, and I had secured my place in it. "I'm ready," I said softly, more to myself than to him. "I'm ready to move forward." That evening, I sat in my living room, the soft hum of the city in the distance, a glass of wine in my hand. The apartment was quiet, peaceful. It was a stark contrast to the chaos I had once known. I thought about the years I had spent in my family's shadow, the years I had spent believing in the lies, in the false narratives that had been spun around me. But now, I was free. Free to live my life on my own terms. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to think about the future. Not the future that had been dictated to me, but the future I wanted for myself. I had made it through the storm, and now I was standing on the other side, stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever before. I raised my glass to the woman I had become. A woman who had faced betrayal, fought back, and won. A woman who would no longer let anyone define her, not even the family she had once believed in so blindly. The phone buzzed on the coffee table, snapping me out of my thoughts. I picked it up and saw that it was a message from Sarah, my old friend. We hadn't spoken much since everything had gone down, but I had a feeling this message was a sign that things were beginning to heal. The message read, "I'm proud of you, Rebecca. You've come a long way. I hope we can catch up soon." I smiled, replying with a simple, "I'd like that. I think it's time to start fresh." As I set the phone down, I looked out the window once more. The night was quiet, the city lights sparkling below. A new chapter awaited, one where I would no longer be bound by the past. The battle was over, but the journey had just begun. And as I sat there, finally at peace, I knew that whatever came next, I would face it with the strength and courage I had gained from the hardest fight of my life. Because in the end, it wasn't just about winning. It was about learning to live for myself. The woman who had once been lost had found her way. And now, nothing could stop me.